Welcome to the second episode of the Sailing Science Center podcast, featuring America's Cup winning yachtsman and founder of AC Sailing SF, Brad Webb. In this episode, I sit with Brad and SSC podcast producer Charlie Deist to discuss the latest innovations at the elite level of yacht racing and what inspires newcomers to sailing about the sport. I want to thank Brad on behalf of the entire SSC team for taking the time to record this podcast, as well as his generosity in donating 4 spots aboard USA 76 to the silent auction coming up at our gala on November 4th. If you haven't already, be sure to book a spot at the gala today for a chance to bid on a variety of items and experiences, including AC Sailing's San Francisco Bay Challenge, while enjoying dinner, drinks, and a tour of Sausalito's famous Bay model. To register, simply go to sailingscience.org and follow the links. You will also have a chance to tour the deck of the Matthew Turner and the new SSC trailer, all while supporting the mission of the Sailing Science Center. And now, without further ado, here is episode 2 and Brad Webb.
All right, well, Brad, thanks for taking the time to join the Sailing Science Center podcast today. This is a privilege for me, especially because I get an opportunity to thank you for inadvertently or without your knowing, having an influence on my own sailing trajectory. It was about, I think, 3 or 4 years ago that I was getting serious about sailing and getting my captain's license, and I was looking for opportunities to crew on boats in San Francisco Bay. I spent a couple dismal shifts on a wine cruise. That was not what I was looking for as a sailor. And then I find AC Sailing, and it's the flagship vessel, USA 76, and I got an email back and was thrilled that I could start crewing on an actual high-performance sailing yacht. And to this day, that still has been some of the best learning. It's certainly the fastest sailboat I've ever been on. And so I wanted to start off just by thanking you for that and giving a little bit of a background for our listeners on who you are. You have spent a lifetime racing sailboats at the very highest level. You've participated in multiple America's Cups, including one that you won, I believe, in 2010. Is that correct?
Yep, 2010 and then 2013 when we were back here in the Bay.
And at least in 2010, that was on USA 76, the boat that's now...
2010 was actually on USA 17, the Trimaran.
Got it. And then 2013 was on the boat that you now have in the fleet for AC Sailing.
No, 2017 was the AC 72, so the big cats. No, USA 76 was Oracle's race boat in 2003. We had a sister ship, USA 71, and that campaign was in Auckland, New Zealand. We spent a bit of time in Ventura, California, with the program, and actually both boats were built in Ventura, California. But ultimately, those boats were race boats for the Cup in Auckland in 2003, and then we used them obviously as tune-up boats for the 2007 Cup, and which is why they made their way to Spain eventually. And were modified for the acts, or what we'll call the acts, for the preliminary racing around Europe until we got our new race boats for the 2007 Cup. So 76 is certainly had some miles on it before I came to own her, but she certainly has a good pedigree. She obviously didn't win the America's Cup in 2003, but she was very successful in the lead up regattas. Leading up to 2007. In fact, the first event, the first act, was held in Marseille in early 2004, and we won that event with USA 76 with a race to spare. So that was kind of her claim to fame on the America's Cup circuit, even though she wasn't the one to ultimately lift the cup.
And what was your role for our listeners? What was your role on those on USA 76 when you were racing on her?
So I was the bowman. Early on in my career, I kind of you kind of find in professional yachting. Eventually, you kind of find your niche. It's like any profession, I guess, where you kind of feel around for a little while to figure out what suits your skill set and your aptitude and your interest. And I kind of gravitated towards the bow. It was a job that was required a lot of speed and forward thinking and athleticism. And it was one of those jobs where you had to be perfect all day long. If you made a mistake, then the whole world knew. There's lots of jobs on the boat where if you mess a few things up, then you can probably cover them up. When you're doing the bow, you have to be perfect all day long. Otherwise, especially at the America's Cup level, then the whole world knows. So that's what really attracted me to that. That demand on performance was a key component that I really enjoyed.
I know that one of the things that Jim is itching to talk about is the human factors of sailing, which fits into the whole mission of the Sailing Science Center, exploring these areas where human performance comes into play. But before we get into that, I just want to touch on an area of your specialty, which is hydraulics and the hydraulic systems on sailboats. From my experience, most of the boats that I've sailed on don't have any hydraulics whatsoever. USA 76 has a couple of components, I believe the boom vang, but for the most part, it seems like most of the systems on that boat are still more of a mechanical. You've got the grinding stations, which are hooked up through a series of switches and gearboxes to the winches. How in the time since that was the state of the art, what's really come into play with hydraulics on sailboats, and what has your role been around those systems?
So the biggest. Well, firstly, let me start how I got into it. Back when I first got into the America's Cup, the campaigns were generally quite long. We moved around the world, and I didn't really have a lot of solid skills going into yachting, apart from my reasonable aptitude for yachting and growing skill set there. But on the days off, I would look around and see a lot of the guys already, especially the older guys, already had skills to do things other than just sweep the floor on the day off. So I kind of had a look around just to figure out what I wanted to do. And there were a couple of guys in the hydraulics department in those early days that were looking for a young guy to come in and learn the trade, and that's really where I started. And I took an interest in it. I took an interest in the fact that these controls were had to be perfect. The trimmers and ultimately the helmsman on the cats were reliant on those to be 100% reliable. Otherwise, the performance of the boat and in a lot of cases the safety of the boat was really going to be compromised. So over the course of my career, what I was very lucky to be able to experience is that in those early days the hydraulics were very manual, very direct. You turned a valve physically, it channeled oil through that valve from a manual pump, either rotary or a piston pump, a hand pump, and then it went off to the function, and essentially leaping all the way forward to what we have now. Everything is electronically controlled. You can put the valves and essentially the guts of the system in different parts of the yacht. And then there's a lot of logic behind the controls as well. Not only you pressing a button to open one valve, but in a lot of cases it's taking into account other aspects of the system, the attitude of the boat, and other external factors to make an adjustment on a foil, whether it's foil below the water or the wing in the air, and those, and especially now, we're not just sailing around at 10 or 11 knots. The boats are sailing around at 50 knots. So those controls, those surface controls, are becoming even more important to the speed and performance of the boats.
And at a certain level, I think, I understand what hydraulics are. There's compressed air involved, or there's something that's delivering a whole lot of power in a very sort of compact period of time. But for the audience, and also for me, because I'm relatively a novice on these things, what are the hydraulic systems? Can you describe just sort of how they work at a basic level?
Oh, well, it's essentially a force multiplier. The human is only able to pull and push so much. So we use hydraulics essentially as a force multiplier to push or pull different control surfaces around the boat. And then the valving, the components, the cylinders, and in a lot of cases we've got accumulators which store energy. They're able to make changes extremely fast, under a second. And so those kinds of changes are the human body and the human mind in most cases is incapable of making those adjustments, either at the loads we're seeing and at the speeds that are required. So we use hydraulics for that purpose, for controlling these surfaces to to a very essentially a very high standard, a very very high control rate, so that we can get the maximum performance out of the boats.
Yeah, I'm sure you could do a PhD level explanation of that, but I think that one will probably suffice for our audience. Jim, I'm going to toss it over to you. I know you've got some more questions about sort of the, how one acquires this knowledge of these systems on a sailboat.
Yeah, well, thank you, Charlie. And I'm going to kick this off first by saying thank you, Brad, for taking time out of your day to join us here.
You're welcome.
For other people who are joining us online, this is the second episode of the Sailing Science Center podcast. And our guest here is Brad Webb, a 7-time America's Cup competitor and currently with Oracle Team USA, and the owner of AC Sailing SF. Did I get all of that correct, Brad?
Yeah, well, actually, I recently made a lifestyle change, and I was with SailGP for since its inception after the Cup in 2017, and was very blessed to be part of that project. It was essentially spearheaded by Larry Ellison and Russell Coutts to start a new worldwide sailing league, and I've been very proud to be part of that organization. But ultimately, the travel demands became just a little bit too much for me. I have a young family, and I felt I was missing too much family time. So I'm actually now at KKMI in Sausalito. Paul Kaplan and I have had a strong relationship since we refitted USA 76 in the early days to turn her from or take her from her race boat pedigree and to the point where we could safely carry passengers under a Coast Guard certificate of inspection. So and now I've moved to the North Bay. So quite a big lifestyle change for me over the last several months. But I'm obviously still in boating, and the salt water still running through my veins.
Okay, well, that's actually a great way to make a three-way plug here: one for AC Sailing SF, one for KKMI, and one for the San Francisco Sailing Science Center, because Paul at KKMI was actually the first donor to our fundraising auction that's coming up in a couple of weeks. So there's a shout to KKMI, and want to make a shout to ACSF, AC Sailing SF, and to you. Reading through your bio, I didn't realize that you had been part of the America True campaign.
That's
and
right.
It was, I don't even know if you knew this, but America True, the nonprofit, just dissolved in May of this year. And the Sailing Science Center inherited you might have been involved in this, an exhibit that America True had created called The Grinder.
Oh, right. Okay. There you go. Yep.
Yeah, and it is it's our most popular exhibit because people like to compete. They like to, get their heart rate up and try this thing. So, and there's some hydraulics in that.
Yep.
So it all ties together, comes, with a nice bow like that.
Yeah,
So
nice. No, America True was my second America's Cup with Dawn and John Cutler, and yeah, very memorable campaign.
yeah, and to tie it together even a little bit more, my wife and I were down in New Zealand in '03, and we went down to Auckland to watch the race, one of the races between USA 76 and Alinghi.
Oh, right. Okay.
And to be completely honest, I don't remember who won,
All
but
right.
I do remember going out and we were on the water, and the tour boat had a big TV screen on it, and it was actually easier to watch the race from the TV screen than looking out over the water.
Right.
So that's how that goes. But I
Oh, very cool.
saw a lot of the races here in San Francisco Bay in 13, so 10 years later.
Right.
So you no longer have the title of department head of hydraulic and drivetrain systems. I think Charlie asked a little bit about that. Are you doing that kind of work now at KKMI?
It's a little bit of a change of pace for me. We get all sorts here in at the yard with mostly cruising boats. We've had a few race boats into the big boat series, and obviously a fair share of power boats. So for me, it's a little bit starting from the bottom. Race boats are while they're technical in their systems, control systems, there's not a lot of plumbing, bathroom and sink plumbing on a race boat, which is an aspect that is dealt with a lot in cruising boats and cruising boat maintenance. Learning a lot about through hulls and engines and cutlass bearings and all those things and bottom paint for that matter. Bottom paint has pretty much been a foreign language to me because we just don't have. I've never really been around that aspect of the industry, but yeah, it's been a good learning experience. I've been here for just around about 4 months now, and just learning the ropes as I go along.
Yeah. Well, for our listeners, and I think Charlie and me were both curious, when did you become a professional sailor, and what did you do before that?
Going back a long way now, I really became a professional sailor by accident. I left or finished high school, and I was actually going to go and do essentially the New Zealand's version of MIT Technology College in New Zealand, and funnily enough, study electronic engineering. But decided to take a year off, and I worked in a boatyard and just to get a little bit more hands-on experience. I went and did a lot of dinghy sailing. And I kind of got to the end of that and still wasn't ready for a tertiary education. So I thought I'd go and see if I could snag a few overseas rides and do some of those blue water classics that I've been reading about in glossy magazines as I got into sailing. So I started off by doing that, and my first international event was actually the America's Cup in '95. First match rate, actually, I take that back. My first international event was the Kenwood Cup in '94, and then my second international event was the America's Cup in '95. So I was very lucky. I just got a couple of good breaks very early on, and went and did some, two obviously amazing events, and just decided that this is what I wanted to do. And realised that those two events weren't going to, two events wasn't going to launch my career. And so after I got home from the Cup in '95, I actually got on a plane and went to England and started doing a lot of sailing and around the UK and Europe. And it wasn't until, so this was '95, wasn't until about the middle of '97 we were at an event. It might have even been Key West Race Week, and it was I was discussing with, and I was working on the boat that I was sailing on, and we were discussing. It was when the new pro amateur rule had just come in, as to how many could be on the boat, and we were talking about how many we had on our boat. And I said to him, well, obviously I'm an amateur, and he turned to me and said, no, you're not. You're a pro. This is what you do for a living. So it was actually, I had to wait until somebody turned to me and told me, this is what I was doing for a living before it actually even occurred to me. And so between 95 and 2000, I just went and did as many events as I could. I did a lot of match racing, sailed with as many skippers and crews, and just to get a real solid foundation. So by the end of the 90s, I'd built up a reasonably good reputation on the circuit, and then I got picked up for America True, and then following America True, picked up for Oracle, and then once I joined Oracle, I did 5 campaigns in a row with under Larry Ellison. So I had a very lucky career in the early days, but I did some lucky breaks in the early days, but I never squandered the opportunities that were presented to me, and just went from one thing to the next.
Yeah, I'm reading between the lines here too. You don't get those opportunities unless you're doing a good job. Did you find your place as a bowman pretty early on in that, or did that take a while to figure out where your best spot was on the boat?
It was reasonably early on. It was a job I just loved doing. So like I said earlier, it's one of those jobs. If you don't get it right, you stand out. You stand out. And so I just kind of focused on that. I focused on that skill, and match racing really was the key to that too. I could barely get a ride at a match racing event to save my life in the early days, but I just kind of kept plugging away. And the great thing about match racing events, even now that they're multi-hulls, is that you can do between 5 and 10 events a day, which means you multiply the number of tacks, jibes, sets, drops, and all of a sudden you realize how many of those maneuvers you're doing over and over again in a short amount of time, versus going to a normal club event or a one design event where you're doing maybe 2 or 3 races a day, but the number of tacks and jibes and sets and drops is a lot less. So that was and the thing about match racing too, and it was that you didn't make any money unless you actually won. You were only making money if there was prize money. So you still had to I still had to go back to wherever my base was and do the boatyard work and do the deliveries, just to keep food in my belly. But I recognised early on that doing match racing was going to be key, because it was it accelerated my skill set in such a profound way compared to doing other types of racing. And so I filled that as much as I could between 95 and 2000. So by the time that cup came around, like I said, I had a reasonable reputation on the circuit. And I liked match racing. I liked that one-on-one. And one of the aspects I also tried to hone in on was knowing the rules very well, so that if we were in a close boat-on-boat situation and I was working the bow, then I knew the rules. I knew what our skipper was trying to achieve. I knew what the other skipper was trying to achieve, and try and manipulate that as much as I could help. Whether it was calling an overlap or calling the boat and boat situation. So that I just enjoyed that aspect. It was close contact and high energy.
It sounds a lot like Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hour rule, that you just have to get in your in your case the races, or the sets and douses, the jibes, the windward marks, the leeward marks. I'm going to change direction a little bit here with AC Sailing. I guess that you and your wife still own that. Is that correct?
Yes.
You own and
Yep.
operate that. And for people who aren't familiar with that, AC Sailing SF is a charter operation that runs former America's Cup boat, an IACC class boat, USA 76, that sails out of Pier 39 here in San Francisco Bay, and takes tourists and others out on an America's Cup experience on the bay. And when I look at that, I see, sort of a lot of my own values in it. What it appears that you've done is you've taken something that you love, namely sailing, and that you're very good at, and you've made it into a business that can inspire others. Uh, what do you think? And I'm assuming that that is the case, assuming that, that you find sailing to be something, that inspires you and excites you and isn't just a job. What do you think the things are about sailing that inspire and captivate people and that can be passed on through um, a trip out on USA 76?
Does It's a good question, and it's a hard one to really put your finger on, because there's each guest and even each of our crew members takes something different away from it. We'll have people that will step on board that will take just the sheer size of what they're sailing on as the awe-inspiring aspect of it. There'll be people that are really interested in the technology, both of what's on 76 and also what led up to 76's era and what has happened beyond that. And then there's the aspect of teamwork. Those boats, we couldn't get around the race track without 17 people working in unison, working together, coordinating at a very high level. And I think that's an aspect that is inspirational to people as well. And that, we have a product called the Bay Challenge, where we have corporate groups come on board, and we essentially do a time run to the Bay Bridge, the Golden Gate Bridge and back. And really the idea of that is just to force these groups to or inspire these groups to work together. And even though they've been dropped in a situation that is completely foreign to them, ask them to do things that are very outside their comfort zone, and can bring that together in a very short amount of time and do their best. I mean, obviously we're there to make sure that we don't step out the boundaries of safety and the yacht's capability, but we know where those limits are. Our guests on board, more often than not, don't know where those limits are, and so find that to be a great platform to explore those aspects of the groups that come on board. And even our crew on a regular basis, we sail between 3 and 4 crew members on board, and a lot of that has to come together as well. To manage the guests, make sure the guests are safe, make sure that we can get the sails up and down safely, get the boat around the bay, coordinate tacks and jibes. And so even within our crew, and Charlie, I'm sure would attest to that that I think is one of the draws for our crew that come on board. Like, every day is a different day. Every day, quite often they're sailing with different crew members, so I have to find a different way of communicating or working within that group, and have to do it very quickly, which is a skill that people do need to develop and can develop in that on 76. So I think it just comes back to what there's lots of aspects to the boat, and you can take from it what you need and what you like.
I did hear, and maybe it's just my own filtering on it, but that, there's sort of an overarching theme there, or a couple. One is that we get satisfaction out of doing things that are difficult and accomplishing them. And the other is that we get, additional satisfaction out of doing that as a team when we're doing something challenging as a team. And I think that probably speaks to a lot of us who are sailing, and the enjoyment of also being outside and so forth.
Very much so.
So we've given you a pretty good plug there at USA 76, and I'm gonna turn the camera on the Sailing Science Center here for a little bit and see if we can.
Yeah, I'm excited for it.
See if we can turn it towards us. And one of the things that struck me just, in the course of this conversation, I don't know if you've researched we call ourselves the SSC. We're set up as a, museum with 7 different galleries. And one of those galleries, Gallery 3, is designated as mechanical advantage and human factors. And as you pointed out, we have mechanical advantage on sailing vessels, either in the form of block and tackle systems or hydraulics or gears on winches, or any number of methods to enhance our own strength as a force multiplier, right? And so those two things fit together. And much of what we've been talking about today is in respect to mechanical advantage and human factors. So with that included as an area of science and technology, I'm going to throw out this question, which is, with everything to consider, from materials science to hydro and aerodynamics to human optimization, what do you find to be the most interesting and exciting areas of science and technology on today's high-end sailboats and in sailing?
Well, I've probably got a multiple-pronged response there. Like I've left. I've kind of stepped away from SailGP and the America's Cup right when we were on the steep side of using technology on sailboats. We were getting to. We were already employing aerospace technologies to control the boats. I didn't get a chance to look over the 75s, the latest iteration of the Cups, but I know they've taken another step beyond that. With Ben Ainslie coming back in, they're obviously got a very close relationship with F1. So we'll be using a lot of their technologies and hydraulics and surface control and micro hydraulics, micro controls. So I was very blessed to be part of that initial entry for sailboats into that arena, and I'm excited that is going to become even more of an aspect in sailing in the future. And like anything at that level, there will be trickle down. We'll see these kind of technologies finding their way into mainstream sailing, not far away. The cost on these isn't initial cost on these isn't necessarily all that high. The cost right now is generally in the reliability and maintenance. But like everything in technology, we'll find ways to deal with that. The other aspect is especially now that we're foiling, is the hydrodynamic technology and the tools that they're using to optimize underwater foils and underwater shapes. And again, this is an area anywhere near my wheelhouse, but kind of having been on the fringe of it and watching where we've come simply from as short a time ago as 2013 and 2014 to the shapes, underwater shapes that we're using now, and not just in SailGP, the F50s or the Cup. We're looking at the way they're implementing these underwater foiling shapes in offshore sailing, which 10, 15 years ago, people looked at that and said that's completely bananas. You're just asking for trouble sailing around the world and sailing out in the ocean and big seas with that kind of using that kind of performance. But we always find it's the human condition, right, to find to accept challenges and find solutions to those challenges. So to me, those are kind of the two outstanding aspects of sailing that are still very exciting and still on the steep end of the curve. 10, 15 years ago we were still debating hull shapes and hull forms, but now the boats are out of the water. Really, all the hulls are doing now is kind of keeping the water out when the boats are at the dock. The hull forms and hull shapes technology is kind of kind of dead at this point. It's those. It's now that we're in foiling, we've kind of embarked on this new tangent. And then I would say there's still, it's not as steep, but certainly what's happening above the water in sails and wings. Obviously SailGP and the F50s have carried on down the road of the solid wing, and the Cup's gone back to this. And continuing on with a soft sail double skin sail, which again I haven't really had a lot to do with, but that's an aspect that's still in its infancy, if you like, and a lot still to learn in that area. But aerodynamics and hydrodynamics and the tools that are being used to analyze these new shapes and this new way of thinking is still in development as well.
As an early marine engineer in the 1980s, I worked in doing some computational hydrodynamics, and we're using a supercomputer. It was one of the 4 largest computers in the country.
Right.
And of course, we have more power on our smartphone today than that had, which I think is pretty exciting. I do want to just make a time check here, Brad. We're at 4:43, and I know you had talked about 4:40. Do we have time for another question?
Yeah, that's fine. Yep.
Okay.
Fire away.
And then I think we'll wrap up here. I'm particularly kind of enthralled, at the most elite levels, and where we're talking about things like SailGP and the America's Cup, maybe not so much in the long ocean racing, but there's in a different way, but the human performance factors, and the fact that I don't think most people really realize that in something like the America's Cup, that the guys in these boats are really elite athletes. And I know they're doing all kinds of biohacking and interesting things in in cycling and other sports, where they're getting these guys into ketosis, and they're have all kinds of nutritional hacks and things like that. What's going on in the elite sailing world in this area with human performance? Because I know this is really a big deal.
Honestly, I can really only speak to where I experienced it, which was not that long ago, but where we were heading, what's going on behind the scenes in the America's Cup now, I can't speak to, and I'm sure it's a level beyond that, but it really became a necessity because we were able to essentially back calculate the amount of horsepower and energy that it was going to take to run these boats, which we're essentially able to reverse engineer what our humans had to be capable of, and then find ways of then bringing our humans, our athletes, up to that level. Mm-hmm. It's how we approached it in Bermuda. We were able to really work out to almost to the joule what it was going to take to get these boats around the track, and then we could take that information back to our trainers and our nutritionists and say, okay, this is essentially where we need to get the guys to. You guys need to figure out how we need to train to do that. And it became you know, and when I first got into sailing, it was there was you had to be strong and you had to be fit, and depending on where you were on the boat, that there was, you know, the slider slid, you know, one way or the other. As a bowman, I had to be kind of fit and light and fast. I didn't need to be built like a grinder. You know, you don't want a heavy bowman running around on the bow of your boat. And then when we moved to the AC-72s, the catamarans, we, you know, the role of the bowman went away, and we all essentially became grinders. So my whole physical training went from a lot of cardio to much more weight training, and you know, trying to build up my build up muscle and also build up endurance, because, you know, we went from doing sailing on a two-hour racetrack to doing these 25 minute races that were, you know, short little sprints, but the amount of energy we had to put out in those short sprints was astronomical. So that was a huge change from you know, how we'd been training, you know, from those days to up to when we switched over to the multi-hulls. And then so yeah, that kind of brings us up to, you know, 2017 or so. The steps they've taken from there into the Cup now, I mean, I can only imagine it's the athlete management and review, I guess, is I think on a much more detailed basis. And it's always interesting to me, you know, and I still know, you know, most of the characters in that world, and just seeing the crew list that are chosen for each day, and kind of having, like, have a little bit of an insight, you know, why they might have chosen the specific crew combinations, you know, based on the conditions and based on, you know, I hate to say it, age, but, you know, there's guys that out there that, you know, I came up through sailing that are still kind of hanging on there, and you know, good luck to them. But you know, it's been interesting to watch, just to see them slowly get phased out, as well as the young guys. You know, they just come roaring through. We all age out at some point. So
we all age out at some point. I remember in the 2013 campaign, Paul Kayard, who is the CEO of Artemis, was saying, he was 55 at the time. He and I are the same age, and he was saying that they had to keep 80% of their maximum heart rate roughly for, you know, 20 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Which is just an astonishing thing to do, you know, for anybody.
Yeah.
And it you know, that comment really struck me, like, that you really have to be an elite athlete to sail these boats the way that they're sailed today.
Yeah, the grinding tests were brutal. Yeah, we would have a grinding test in the morning, and you know, we'd have a grinding machine, and we would have to go through this regimen, and we would all be ranked. And that's kind of how we, you know, that's how our peer review went. And you know, it was pretty obvious those were, and pretty obvious those that were putting in the effort, but it was also obvious those that you know, I could tell in 2017 I was certainly starting to slip down the order a bit as the young guys were coming through. And, you know, age and treachery could only go so far, but you know, I certainly poured as much as I could. But so that in 2013 that was, sorry, but yeah, by the time 2017 came around, I was ready for a shore roll.
Yeah. Well,
age and treachery can only go so far. That's a good
Exactly.
closing line. I again just want to thank you for taking the time. It's there's a lot that I can learn from this kind of experience, and I think that our listeners are going to enjoy hearing about what it's like at those high levels, and it'll be fun to see how the sport evolves. There's got to be new stuff coming down the pipeline, but we'll be following it, and I hope that the Sailing Science Center and AC Sailing and KKMI can continue to be partners and collaborate down into the future.
Yeah, it's an exciting time for sailing in the Bay Area. We look at likes of Big Boat Series, which it used to be a big boat series, used to be lots of big boats, but it was encouraging to see good numbers out at this at the latest event here in the Bay. And there's a lot of the COVID hangover and people just wanting to get out and get into it again. But I think it's exciting for the sport and exciting for the Bay Area. And there's lots to look forward to.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time today, Brad. We really appreciate it. And
my pleasure.
For people, listening at home, we want to give a plug to USA 76 and AC Sailing SF and to KKMI. We hope if you're a boat owner that you'll take your boat to KKMI. And if you're not a boat owner, or even if you are and you want to get out on the bay and have a experience on an America's Cup boat, well, there's only one place to go, and that's AC Sailing SF out of Pier 39. So thanks again, Brad, and we hope you have a great afternoon.
Love to see you. Thank you, Jim. Thanks,
all right. Take care.
The Sailing Science Center podcast is a production of the San Francisco Sailing Science Center. The interview was conducted by Jim Hancock. Production and editing was performed by Charlie Dice. Thank you for listening.